Yeah, it's the same probably the whole problem with like the new Jules Verne, edition of Journey to the Center of the Earth. That's a number 2 for me. Yeah. I love that book too. But with Brendan Fraser, that's just kind of an absolute wreck. So
yeah, it's sad too because he was so good in The Mummy.
Yeah, Mummy and Encino Man, right?
Encino Man! I totally forgot about that movie. Oh, that's so great. Yes, Encino Man, George of the Jungle as well.
He's breaking out role in Encino Man.
Exactly.
Nice.
I think the biggest misconception about demonology is that exorcism or deliverance looks like The Exorcist. I don't know, we were talking about The Exorcist. William Blady's book, The Exorcist, came out in 1971. And in fact, I went to a used bookstore the other day and discovered a first edition copy.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
I'm now the proud owner of this really wonderful copy. It's an excellent book. Blady's writing is incredibly good. But the trauma experienced by Reagan McNeil is highly unlikely.
Welcome to the Dastardly Dingoes podcast, a show that celebrates all things nerdy. You'll get an insider's look into the world of comic books, graphic novels, TV and film, gaming and pop culture, as well as the technologies that drive all of it. Now, are you ready to get nerdy?
Welcome to the Dastardly Dingoes podcast, the show about all things nerdy. We discuss nerd news, movies, TV shows, games, comics, and so much more. I'm Brian.
I'm Chad.
Brace yourselves, folks, because we're about to get nerdy. Folks, this week's episode is a little different, but still very much has to do with nerddom, because nerddom can be just about anything, right? So we, in our culture, we love horror movies. Everyone but Chad, because he's lame. We love just high fantasy stuff, and a lot of those movies that we see, The Exorcist, The Conjuring, even Lord of the Rings, in many ways, ties back to the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is demonology and spiritual warfare. And we're going to explore that in many ways. And to help us do so, this week's guest is the story and world building editor of my comic, Memoirs of an Angel. He is extremely well versed in biblical theology, demonology, ancient culture, and has written his dissertation on spiritual warfare and world religions at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He was a pastor for over 10 years and currently works at Passages as the director of strategic partnerships, as well as a certified demonologist. Ladies and gentlemen, Dingoes and Dingettes, we welcome the fantastic Luke Bray.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Oh, and now that you are officially on the show, we are going to do something special that we like to do with our guests. We're going to knight you, sir, as an official dingo. So change your LinkedIn, change your business cards.
I have been knighted.
Indeed. You are a knight of the dingoes.
Mm. You were the first person to bow when we did that. That was
true.
official.
Yeah. So now we have to have we'll talk to the council about maybe getting.
If somebody knights you, you have to bow.
You should.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a new segment we're going to introduce called Begging and Pleading. It's where we're going to hit you with facts like we've had over 25,000 views on our channel, which is amazing, but only 10% of those people have subscribed to our show, which means we've got the vast majority of people coming and watching and then leaving. We want you to come and want you to watch our videos, but if you like it, just take the time to click on the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell notification, share with your friends. It means a lot, and it helps us to continue to do what we're doing. Have you done it yet? Okay, go ahead. I'll wait. Please. Please. Just subscribe, please. All right, end of rant. Back to the show.
It's disrespect.
How you doing, Luke?
I'm great. It's good to be with you guys.
Good to have you here, man.
Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. For our viewers that don't already know, Luke and I are very good friends. Chad and Luke are mortal enemies and hate each other viciously. So things might get a little ugly. I'm going to have to mediate, but we'll make it through together. I
think really the problem here is we took some doctoral classes and he finished his and I didn't. So I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah, there's a little competition here, guys. And I'm just stupid and in the middle. So here we go. I draw picture books. This is great.
There you
go. So Luke,
well, if it helps you at all, Chad, I have not yet finished. So
did you not?
I'm going to be graduating in December. So
okay. I took the THM. So
okay.
Chad was like, nope, I tap out. That's what that is.
Well, I got a promotion and I was a general manager of a restaurant for over a year and that took my life away. So I was like, I'm done with school.
Soul out, huh? Yeah.
It literally did. We could probably talk about that afterwards and all the demonic activity.
First time we met was in an anthropology class, if you remember that, right?
Yeah,
so,
I do.
Gosh.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it was awesome.
Well,
anyway, we're going far afield, guys.
That's fine. No, we like to chase these fun rabbit trails. But just to kind of get the attention off of how smart you both are, Luke, how's your 2021 been?
So far, so good. You know, we moved our whole family down to Texas during the year of 2020. That was kind of a wild ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were in Chicago, moved down to Texas, and things are going well. It's abnormally cold still. We brought a blizzard with us when we moved from Chicago.
You did, and maybe that's a topic we can talk about with the demonology.
I feel like that's stupid, and I don't understand how that works. But you know, and this morning it was still 35 degrees. So I have no idea. I thought we were supposed to be in Texas.
Gosh. Yeah.
So
that's insane because that's like stereotypically and factually actually that Texas is never that cold.
No, it's weird. It's weird. I mean, it'll jump up and get probably 135 degrees or something, but
one can only hope. Did you have I saw pictures of people that lived in Texas where like their ceiling fans had icicles like that could kill somebody?
It wasn't that bad.
Okay, wasn't that bad for you then? Good.
Yeah, we ended up huddling all downstairs because we didn't have any heat for like 3-4 days, and it was like 0 outside. But we huddled down there. We had like a gas fireplace and kind of built like blanket walls and had to sleep over with the kids for 3 days.
Well, that's fun. You built like
it was an element of fun, but there was a portion of it that was a large portion of it that wasn't
fun for the kids, and the rest of it was like, oh gosh, this is awful.
Oh gosh, this couch is not as comfortable to sleep on as it is to sit on, kind of situation.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man. Well, let's dive into our initial questions that we like to ask everyone. And one of these is usually a dreaded question that everyone hates. So I'm looking forward to asking it to you. But the first question is, what kind of nerd are you? Right? Because there's a lot of different kinds of nerds. There's, comic book nerd, movie nerd. What are you?
Well, I think it's fairly obvious by the background. I'm a book
nerd. Speaking of which, a little bit of information about, didn't you code all of your books? Isn't that a thing? Didn't you do that?
Library of Congress, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I discovered when you get to a certain point with the amount of books that I had, how do you put them in certain categories? What if they're two different categories but they're combined? I ended up using somebody else's system.
Yourself. You are a book nerd.
Yes. Yeah, there you go.
Yes, that is. Yes.
And let it be known, it took way too long to accomplish that. So, like a couple of years worth of tagging.
I would come into this man's office, and he would just be sitting there with a barcodes, generator and all these things. Like, what is happening? He told me, it was like, you have way too many books. This is.
But then too much time. I don't know.
There's just no such thing, actually.
Between the 3-4 jobs or whatever I was doing, I was coding books. How ridiculous.
Yeah. My gosh. At one point, how many jobs did you? You did have like 4 jobs.
Once. Plus full-time school. I think it was like 4. So
gross.
Too much.
It's amazing that you're still sane.
And alive.
Yeah. That is very true. So okay. So you are, I would say you're absolutely a huge book nerd. Really quick, off the cuff. What book comes to mind first when you think of like your favorite book of all time?
The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Oh,
wow, that was fast. That was like fast. You had that there.
All right.
I should have brought that one to show you guys. It's actually on the shelf across from me right now.
Huh.
Why that one?
Well, it's an amazing book. For one, I like the way that Doyle writes. Of course, he wrote all of the Sherlock Holmes books, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular book, it has an evolutionary kind of spin on it, which is fine. I mean, it was written in the 19th century, but like the writing's so good, but the adventure is so good. It's such a wonderful story about this young man who's kind of like having this coming of age experience. He wants to marry this girl, but she won't marry him until he does something adventurous, right? And shows himself to be a man. And so he goes on this journey to South America with two really well-known scientists of the day, one who's trying to prove a point that there are dinosaurs still alive today on this particular plateau. And he's with this other guy who's like an adventurer, explorer kind of thing. And they go and they get trapped on the top of this plateau where there's dinosaurs, and they're like running for their lives, and they finally escape. And the whole story is just really exciting. As I guess a younger man, I read it a long time ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And then it has just continued to be one of those that just captures your imagination. So I love it.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and guess you did not care for the Will Ferrell movie version of that story. Did you even know that was a thing?
No, I didn't know it was a thing.
Don't watch it. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's the same problem. The whole problem with like the new Jules Verne, edition of Journey to the Center of the Earth. That's a number 2 for me. Yeah. I love that book too. Yeah. But with Brendan Fraser, that's just kind of an absolute wreck. So
yeah, it's sad too because he was so good in The Mummy.
Yeah, Mummy and Encino Man, right?
Encino Man. I totally forgot about that movie. Oh, that's so great. Yes, Encino Man, George of the Jungle as well.
He's breaking out role in Encino Man.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, since we're on the topic of movies, what are your top 5 movies of all time?
It's funny is I was thinking about that because I knew based on, watching the show that's a question that oftentimes you guys ask. And it was easier for me to come up with the top 5 books than it was top 5 movies, but I can do movies.
All right.
So I think Quigley Down Under is one of my top movies. I've watched it a number of times. Yeah. Love that movie. Braveheart, I feel like that has to go without question. Oh, yes. And then The Exorcism of Emily Rose is actually one of my top movies. I watched it a number of times, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on of why that is one of the movies that I appreciate.
I'd be interested to hear that. Yeah.
Notting Hill is a top movie of mine, which puts me in a whole different category.
Who are you? What is going on here?
So hold on. So why Notting Hill? What's up with that?
I love the Hugh Grant, Julia Roberts romance, like the celebrity and the guy who owns the bookshop. I can't, if I'm on a plane, and I get on planes quite often with my job, if I'm on a plane and Notting Hill is on the plane, I watch it. It doesn't matter if I watched it last week, I watch it.
My wife would be your biggest fan. She loves that movie.
Oh, that's
so funny.
And then the Marvel Universe. I couldn't pick. So I enjoy all of them.
Nice.
So
probably not as much as you guys. Universe?
I haven't really. I've watched them, but I haven't watched the Snyder cut.
Oh, then you haven't really seen them then.
I haven't really seen them.
Yeah, it's. I mean, no, really, it's a thing. We talked about it many times. It's Warner Brothers is poo poo. They suck, man. So
it's disappointing. So.
Yeah, indeed. Cool. Well, so you did mention Quigley Down Under. Did you know that Tom Selleck was almost Indiana Jones?
I did know that.
Yeah. And that's essentially, that movie is essentially kind of what we would have had.
Yeah.
Which I wouldn't have been mad about. He was great. He
was an amazing cowboy. I think one of the things that really made Quigley so strong is how big Tom Selleck was in comparison to Alan Rickman. Like Alan Rickman was a tiny person in comparison. I mean, I think Tom Selleck's like 6'4" or 6'5".
Oh, he's huge.
Just an enormous dude. And he's like the quintessential American, like, stomp you into the ground. There's no better portion of cinema, in my opinion, than that last scene. Alan Rickman, he thinks he's going to win this gunfight with Tom Selleck, and Tom Selleck just shoots 3 people before anyone can clear their holsters. And then he walks up, and Alan Rickman is dying, and he's just like completely bewildered, like, how did this happen? And he says, I didn't say that I didn't know how to use one. just that I never had a need for one. And it's just like,
Yeah, in my imagination, I would love to see a face-off of Doc Holliday and Quigley.
Oh, I should have mentioned Tombstone. I love Tombstone too. That's a great movie.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Tombstone and Django Unchained are my two favorite westerns.
That's a good movie.
Yeah,
I like Django
Absolutely.
Unchained.
so all right, well, let's dive in. So before we get into just the meat of the subject of demonology, tell us your story, Luke. So I mean, you're a comic book editor, as well as a demonologist. You've been a pastor, you've been a professor, correct, for a little while. Yeah,
an instructor at Boyce College.
yeah. So kind of tell us your story. How'd you go from kind of stepping stone into all these things?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting story. I think that in my past, warfare or conflict has always been something that seems to exist, and just in various forms. So, Brian, you know this. I'm not sure, Chad, if you know this about me, but I'm a veteran, and I was in the Army years ago and served in the Iraq War back in 2003 and 2004.
Mhm.
And I think that experience, as it does for everyone who goes through combat, it changes the way that you see life. It changes priorities. It changes the way that you view yourself and your own identity and what's most important and how to approach, potential, whether it's emotional combat or spiritual combat or whatever it might be. So I think that experience really altered me as a human being because, for one, it matured me much quicker than I think than just being in the United States as a 20-year-old or 22-year-old would have matured me, which I think prepared me to be a pastor earlier than maybe others. And so coming back from that experience, it was very difficult because not only did I have a little bit of PTSD that I was dealing with, but it's very difficult from going from having a pistol under your pillow and going out on missions every day and getting shot at to go back home where nobody allows you to carry a weapon and there is no danger whatsoever. Like you're living in America in like northeastern Missouri. And for me, that was more traumatic than actually being in a combat zone, because you're having to deal with the emotion of like you're already keyed up for danger, but there's nothing to be scared of. There's no threat. And so what was helpful for me is kind of a segue into a position with the Army that gave me a full-time spot working in narcotics. So actually I worked as an intelligence officer for a narcotics task force in northeastern Missouri. And at the same time was like a deputy sheriff and did some undercover work and things like that. Not a tremendous amount, but enough to kind of get that threshold of danger that I needed in my life to be able to kind of pass from combat zone to normal life zone. And so, and from that point, I began kind of having a different experience. I did like 3 years in that intelligence work, and I began to find myself just having a negative view of people, humans, and the things that they would do, not only to their bodies and to themselves, but also to their families. I mean, just devastating things that you would see that were happening with children in homes where people were smoking methamphetamines. And so I began to have kind of a cynical attitude toward people and began to feel the Lord nudging me that it was time to move on because, these are the kinds of people that need hope. These are the kinds of people that need the truth that I believed he wanted me to share. And so that's what kind of eventually pulled us to Louisville, Kentucky, where I was just blessed beyond measure to be able to pastor the people at Jeffersontown Baptist Church. And so I did that for 10 years. And so anyway,
that's where our bromance blossomed, everyone.
That is where
yes.
Absolutely. So I think when it comes to pastoral ministry, I'm trying to pull us from kind of that world then to pastoral ministry and kind of like what brings us then to like demonology and how do I bridge that gap. I'm not sure exactly what year in pastoral ministry that this stuff began to happen in my own life and the life of my family, but I distinctly remember we began having a demonic attack on me personally, but then also my daughter, who at the time I think was 2-3 years old. And there's when I say demonic attack, sometimes people are just like, oh gosh, what, like, were there bottles flying across the room? Were there levitations? No, none of that. Maybe I'll explain just briefly what I mean by demonic attack. So there's two different, I guess, categories of demonic attack. One is ordinary and one is extraordinary. So ordinary demonic attack are things that you read in the scriptures that talk about temptation. So, like, when you think about Genesis 3, you think about the serpent tempting Eve, then you have this kind of tempting moment, right? But then there's also things that Paul talks about with regard to the blinding of the eyes of those who are unbelieving. So it's a deception, or even like a clouding or a blinding of truth. That's what ordinary demonic activity looks like. And that's stuff that everyone experiences, probably on a daily basis, whether you know it or not. It's these things are happening. There's other things that I might mention with regard to, like, different categories of where that happens, like in the flesh, in the world, and then demonic entities like the devil. But so that's ordinary. Extraordinary is a little bit different. And that's usually the stuff that's much more rare. But that's the stuff that usually makes the best movies. So, so the first kind of category, it's usually I would say it's like on a spectrum or a continuum when I think of it, so that it's, when you use the word demon possession, people get a little freaked out. But I look at the whole of demonic activity as more of a spectrum, so that there's different levels at which one might be demonized. And so temptation of ordinary stuff is on one side. And then you have extraordinary, you have what's called oppression. And a lot of people experience this, but what this really means is just mental bombardment. And so that may be voices in your own mind telling you to do certain things. I've spoken to many people that have talked about, voices that are telling them to hurt themselves or hurt other people, or telling them that they should doubt themselves or turn against God or curse God, things like that. And most of the time, these kinds of voices are in like a second person, singular kind of, you should do this or you should do that. So that's what usually is called oppression. The next is infestation. Infestation is called sometimes different things, but most of the time that's what people think of with haunted houses. So when you think of like the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, right? Yeah. Probably never been there. Have you, Chad? Since you don't like horror.
I have not. I've been to a haunted house before, but you could definitely tell.
Wait, hold on, like a real haunted house?
No, like on Halloween, let's go to the haunted house type thing.
Oh, okay. Not a real.
I think we should have a Dastardly Dingoes demon night at Waverly Hill. They have a tour. We could do it. Luke, you could come. It'd be great. It'd be a good time. We could film.
I'm sure I want to.
This is what I would say. I would not have a problem doing that because, and Luke, you could correct me on this probably, but most people, when they think about those places, they think in terms of ghosts. They think of in terms of like, and I always tell people like, I don't believe in ghosts because we don't hang around after we're dead. So, but I do believe in like spirits, like demons and forces and things like that. But as a Christian, there's a level in which you fear that because, it can be scary and they use fear to tempt you to not believe in God or to weaken your faith and things like that. But there's another sense in which you don't need to be afraid because you're protected by God. So like, I think it would be more like, I would have to deal with, and most people have to deal with more of their own imagination when they're in a place like that. You're just sitting there thinking of, you hear a noise and you think, it's like, there was a funny, I don't mean to go on a rabbit trail real quick, but there's a funny little clip from, I don't know if you've heard of Bill Burr. He's a comedian, but he made this funny joke. He said, what's the end game of a ghost? When you think about it, do you really think after you die, the end game is to like, ooh, I'm just going to hang out in an attic and just like move things every once in a while, like for eternity. Like it's so dumb to think about it like that. So anyways, I just thought about like most people think of ghosts and demons that way.
Chad, I have a book for you to read. I'm going to let you borrow it. It's called Demons. And it's by a guy that Luke and I really enjoy. It's by Michael Heiser. And he may rock your world a little bit with some of the things you believe about.
Yeah, he might. Yeah. So the idea of infestation with like haunted houses and things, And I'm not sure, based on things that I've read, where I stand at this point about ghosts. I know what the Bible says about those who are followers of Christ, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. But I'm not so sure that we know exactly what happens to everyone. They don't go directly to a place of torment. It seems as though there's a waiting area, and I'm not sure exactly. When you look at the Hebrew worldview, it seemed to be that everyone went to the place of the dead. And so the New Testament kind of gives a little bit of a different vision when it comes to, like, even Jesus when he's on the cross with the thief, and he says, "You'll be with me in paradise." And that's where we kind of get some of those different, I guess, theological perspectives. But yeah, it's interesting. But regardless, most of the time, if not all of the time, I would rather say all of the time, haunted houses are demonic in some sense. And so if they're authentically and not just kind of people, being imaginative, where there's really severe things that have happened in those locations, or, it can be for a number of things. So demons are a little bit like sharks when it comes to, like, chum. So when terrible things happen in places, they kind of lick that stuff up. And so they find themselves lurking about it. It's oftentimes why they're, why people have always thought that graveyards are haunted, because their demons like to put themselves in places of where horror has happened, or where despair has happened, or in isolation, all kinds of things that you can kind of look at historically. But so you got oppression, then you got infestation, then you got obsession. That's another one that's a little bit confusing, because when we think about obsession, we think of like a stalker or something like that. But I guess it makes sense a little bit, because now it's like not only mental torment, like the oppression model, but it's also physical torment. So it can be things like physical activity where they might scratch, or have some sort of biting sensation, or pinching or pushing or something like that upon someone's body. And then the last one is what's known usually as possession, or true possession, oftentimes in some of the literature. But that really is just mental and physical torment, plus the added degree of control, various levels of control over the body, whether that's over their mouth, their eyes, their limbs, all kinds of things. And then there's, within that, there's levels of, some people say that they can remember what has happened to them. Others say that they can't remember what's happened to them. So anyway, I give you all of that just to say it's a very complex kind of field of study to see those things. And so I had no idea what I was dealing with. And I was having spiritual attacks on me. I mean, just normal temptation things. But then it changed into there was experiences where I was waking up in the middle of the night and having this, like, incredible fear, and for no reason. Like, there's nothing to be fearful about. I'm in my home, everybody's fine, but there was just like almost like this palpable kind of fear that had overtaken me. And so that began happening. And then it would happen in my office during the day. I would be in my office, and I could have sworn to you that I was not in the office alone. Look, if I had reached out and touched someone and there was a body there, I would have been like, okay, well, I knew somebody was here. That kind of intensity. And then at home, my daughter, she began experiencing these same kinds of nightmare experiences, but she was awake. She would wake up around 3 a.m., which, a lot of people talk about the witching hour, and talk about 3 a.m. is kind of when demons like to do things. And it is actually true. Not always, but it is, that does happen quite a bit at 3 a.m. And usually they say it's kind of like the opposite of 3 p.m., which would be the time that Jesus died, or it's like an offense to the Trinity in some way. So anyway, she was waking up in the middle of the night, and I would go in to try and calm her down, and she's awake, and she's telling me things like, there's something in the corner. She's staring at the corner. She's screaming and crying. And I'm asking her like what she's seeing, and she's telling me she's seeing a lion, and the lion's crawling around the room. And, I'm praying, but feeling very, very, unprepared for this kind of activity. So I think that began to take hold of me and say, I need to take take interest in this and really begin to dive deeply into the subject, which eventually led to me taking our church through a study on spiritual warfare, which continued to kind of deepen the desire to research and think through and help in these kinds of situations. So from that point, it was weird. Like I became kind of like a flame, and there were moths all around. Like people began coming to me for discussions about this. I had a lady one time stop because she felt like the Spirit of God told her to stop by the church, and she wanted to talk to me because she was seeing these different things happening in her house and wanted to know what I thought. I'm just like, what would make you think that the pastor of this Baptist church would have an opinion about flying orbs in your house? You know what I mean? Like, and it was just weird how it felt like those things kind of kept happening. I mean, I've had conversations with people like we went to Dallas, Texas several years ago for a convention, and we were riding with an Uber driver. And I asked the Uber driver a simple question. I can't even remember what it was. And he turned to me and he says, "What do you think about demons?" And I'm just like, how does that even come up on a 4-minute drive to, a Mexican restaurant, but it just seems to happen to me. In fact, my wife oftentimes just laughs when these kinds of conversations come up. She's like, of course, somebody's going to ask Luke something about demons or something about angels or something about spiritual warfare. So anyway, that's just, and so like Brian and you and I have been talking about these things for, I don't know how long we've been friends.
Yeah. Since day one, really.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been a good 8 years now, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, it's been all long. Yeah. And so like your idea for the comic was, I think, one of the things that brought us together and made us such good friends, because I was dealing with this stuff in kind of the real world, and you were bringing in kind of this creative analysis and kind of world building of Memoirs of an Angel, and we began to bounce ideas off each other and think about it, and I really appreciate the direction that Memoirs of an Angel has gone. I think it's a really, really strong work that I think provides a lot of people something that they need to know about, but in a creative way that allows them to read it and engage it. Not everybody's going to read the books that I read.
Right.
So
well, and that's, I mean, that especially just, for people who land in the Christian worldview, it's a topic that really is intentionally looked over and is intentionally avoided in many churches, unfortunately. And you read books like the one I just brought up, Demons, and different things that Michael Heiser's done, a few other, prominent figures. That's about it. There's not a whole lot of folks that really go out of their way to really do a whole lot of research, even though the stuff is there and there's evidence there. There's things actually literally in the Bible that you just, in churches, many people just don't talk about. And so with Memoirs, that's why I really wanted to bring you on board, because we were talking about all this. So we were, really bouncing ideas off of each other and getting excited, as we were learning these things together. And I really wanted the series to be rooted in, the biblical worldview of what that had to say about this topic, for multiple reasons. But for one, just because a lot of people don't know about any of this stuff because people just don't talk about it.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So.
Yeah, or they have caricature in their mind.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
They think of like horror movies and things like that. And I would love, I have so many questions that are going through my mind right now. So I'm trying to sort through all that and stick to our outline here. But I know you mentioned at some point you were going to talk about that movie, because I would like to know, like, which ones do you think are more accurate than others as far as the movies go? But that's for maybe another question. But so you work at Passages as the director of strategic partnerships, and you are a comic book editor, and you're also in this category of a demonologist. So maybe like you talked a little bit about being an editor, and like, how does being a director of strategic partnership and an comic book editor have anything to do with being a demonologist? Like, are they three separate roles that you have? Like, what does a demonologist do? Would you consider yourself primarily a demonologist? Would that be like, it's a hobby, or like, how do you, what is it? What is that? So just talk a little bit about that.
I don't know. Maybe one would say I moonlight as a demonologist. I'm not sure. I mean, my full-time work is, more or less unrelated to some of these other things. I think the demonology work is pretty well connected with Brian's work with Memoirs, as far as like we have a lot of good conversations, as well as Brian is probably one of my my go-to people when that comes to a case, and I need to think through it. And he and I have talked about these things so often and for so long. I very much trust his opinion and his discernment. And so, in fact, when I do have cases where I'm actually having to go and, meet with people, counsel with them, pray with them, seek deliverance for them, he's the one that I often will call and ask that he spend some time praying with me as I'm there. So, there is a very deep connection between those two, I guess, categories of me. The other one is a little bit different. I'd love it, and I'd be happy to talk about it at some point. I don't know that this is the appropriate place, but
right.
We don't have to focus on that.
It's a wonderful organization, but they're very distinct kind of categories. As far as what a demonologist does, I would say, I mean, for me, I don't necessarily take on, and I think this is one of the reasons, Brian, because sometimes you've told me about being a demonologist, all the things that I've done and are continuing to do, it kind of, qualifies more or less. And I agree, but I think one of the reasons I'm sometimes sensitive to the term demonologist is because our culture uses it, in a way that I think is probably dangerous, because there are secular demonologists that don't have the same kind of desire that I have to be rooted in the Bible.
Or you look at shows like, what is it? Like the Ghost Hunters and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they
paranormal
just
activity.
They just go in and record them yelling at ghosts or something.
Right. Right. And that to me is not really that helpful and potentially dangerous. Yeah. So to answer your question, Chad, I think a biblical demonologist does a variety of different things. But one specifically is, obviously studying demons and angels. And not to I think this is one of the dangers, is to study them exclusively as though that's the most important thing in life. Right. That's not healthy, and that's not helpful. I think there's two different errors that people can make when it comes to biblical demonology or biblical angelology. One is to ignore it like it doesn't exist, which many people do that. And the other is to go the opposite direction and think that that's the only thing to talk about. But the reality is that's not the centerpiece of Christian faith. It's Jesus, right? Yeah. And so, we want to make sure that I want to make sure that what I'm focused on is the big picture, but then not neglect these pieces that are really important to people's life and experience and hope, because so many people have been left out in the cold from Christians or churches that disregard demonic activity to the point where these people feel very hopeless and depressed, and suffer, and for years without any kind of respite, because no one's really taking what they're saying seriously. So I would say I'm a biblical demonologist, which is to study the basis of biblical revelation with the application of helping those who are plagued by demonic attack in various forms. So
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, let me ask you a kind of a superficial question for, like some people that are watching this, maybe they're not Christian, or they have in their minds the Exorcist, right? Or like more of a Catholic kind of view on demon activity and that kind of thing. Like, so compare what you do with that. Like, someone watches The Exorcist and you're on our show saying I'm a demonologist. What's the difference?
Well, surprisingly, I think one of the things that has surprised me over the last several years in my reading and research is that the Catholic Church has a good, kind of a good approach in many ways when it comes to exorcism or deliverance. And so much of the writings that they have done, even like the Roman ritual, which is what Roman Catholic priests use when they do an exorcism, some of it's extremely good, just really well written. And what I've discovered, and I think one of the things that they realized early on when they began to create this ritual, was that when you get into a situation where there are demons present, being not distracted being distracted can be a very serious problem. And so relying upon your own mind to be able to keep control of what you need to say and how you need to say it when you're praying or when you're reading scripture. I've had moments where I'm reading scripture and I'm in a situation where we're working through this process of deliverance, and my mind is being attacked, and like a fog where I can't even hardly use my mouth to say the words that are supposed to come out as I'm reading a psalm, like Psalm 91. And so, like, if I'm trying to just do this on my own with my own brain, it would be very challenging to do that. And so, I think that some of their stuff is very, very good and very, very helpful. Now, what I have, my approach is a little bit different from maybe other evangelicals, is that I've read so widely. I just kind of picked and choose some of the things that I felt were really strong and powerful. One of the things that I do and I'd like to do is, I don't think that incense has any kind of special magical power or anything like that. But for the sake of the believers that I'm working with, and I think as a show of force for the demonic, I use incense in a censer, and we'll go throughout the home and we'll pray in each room with the censer. And the incense that I use is frankincense. And what I tell the people that I'm serving is, I say, this is not magical. This is not going to do anything that would be supernatural. But what it is reminding us of the power of the resurrected Christ. This frankincense, it signifies in our mind, helps us believe and trust in the power of the resurrection, even as we smell it, right? And I think that's sensory. We're made to be sensory beings, and that's the reason I think we worship in that way. Whether we're taking the bread or taking the cup when it comes to communion. We're voicing, we use lighting, candles, right? So I think sensory stimulation is really important to generate faith. And so I'd use that as an opportunity for faith, and also a show of strength, and say to the demonic entities that are there, look, you have no power here. The power of the resurrected Christ has covered this entire place, and we will oust you. So there's elements that I've kind of pulled from different places and utilized, but there is a process that I walk through. Maybe just in brief, it's not real complicated, but I walk through. There's time of prayer and repentance, making sure that we're all in agreement where we are as followers of Jesus. And then I take some time and I read scripture as kind of a confirmation of that which we believe. So it's, there's many Psalms, some of the Gospels, reading about who we are in Christ. And then there's a whole process of kind of counseling, question and answer that we walk through, and then, remove demonic attachments as needed through that process. And then afterwards, there's a time of celebration and praise. And so we'll usually sing the doxology and pray and thank the Lord for his goodness and his power. So
sorry, Chad, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and just briefly, you mentioned having like a case, or someone has come to you. Is this something like a formal process where like people know, hey, Luke Bray is a demonologist and I'm struggling with this particular thing, and they reach out to you? Or is it something more informal, or like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I guess it'd be more informal. I don't have a shingle on the outside of my house saying, demonologist or exorcist here, something like that. So more of it's informal. People that know me or have trusted me in the ministry in the past, those kinds of things come. And I have kind of a formal information sheet that I have people fill out that gives me a little bit more clarity about what they might be dealing with. Mm-hmm. So it provides some medical information. It also provides some information about their past experience with like occultism. So a lot of questions that are related to, have you ever done this? Have you ever played with a Ouija board? Have you ever done astral projection? Have you ever played with tarot cards, or, a variety of different things? But what that allows me to know is kind of what entry points might there be in their lives when it comes to occultism or unrepentant sin. Yeah.
And this will kind of lead into our next question. Luke, you mentioned, medical history and, a counseling process. So right now, there's probably some folks out there who are skeptical that are saying,
Sure.
well, what about, multiple personality disorder? What about
Sure.
like genuine mental disorders that a lot of times can be, assumed as possession or something like that? So how do you kind of work through all of that?
Well, number one, I'm not a medical doctor, right? So I'm still in the process of kind of finding a medical doctor that could be of assistance when identifying certain cases. But there's a really great book that just came out this year, or I guess last year, called Demonic Foes. But it's written by a gentleman, Dr. Gallagher, and he, for 25 years, worked with Catholic priests, but he's a board-certified psychiatrist. And I think he was at Columbia, actually, and was a professor there. And just an extremely good book. And he talks about, some of these issues related to demonic possession and psychiatry, and how there is a distinction. In fact, I've read some who would say that, and I think that this might be true. I think that it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both.
Yeah.
It couldn't be, mental illness, physical illness with demonic attachment involved. And when we see this all over the New Testament, one woman's bent over and she can't stand up, right? There's some sort of physical manipulation illness that a demon has caused, or foaming at the mouth, kind of like epileptic kind of seizures, but it's demonic, but it's also physical. So like there's sometimes where it seems like there's a both and situation. But then there's also significant mental disorders that people struggle with. And so Gallagher actually says that in his 25 years of serving in this capacity, he's seen very rarely where it's a combination. And so, most of the time it's determined through psychiatric care, whether it's psychiatric or whether it's demonic. And anyway, I would point you to that resource. It's a very good book, especially from someone who is a certified psychiatrist who also argues that the demonic are real.
Yeah.
That's pretty challenging to the skeptic, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And what was that book called again?
It's Demonic Foes by Richard Gallagher.
Okay, cool. Great. And just to, kind of piggyback off of that, a message to the skeptics, kind of some clarity here. Because there's a lot of people that, they've either not heard this stuff before, or they've heard the extreme crazy people talk about it in weird ways. What would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions about demonology? And kind of addressing some of the skeptical approaches to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the biggest misconception about demonology is that exorcism or deliverance looks like The Exorcist. I don't know. We were talking about The Exorcist. William Blady's book, The Exorcist, came out in 1971. And in fact, I went to a used bookstore the other day and discovered a first edition copy.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
I'm now the proud owner of this really wonderful copy. It's an excellent book. Blady's writing is incredibly good. But the trauma experienced by Reagan McNeil is highly unlikely. And that's not to say that the experiences have not been recorded, right? She levitates, her head turns around, her facial features change, her voice changes, she vomits pea soup, all of these different things that happen. All of those things have actually been recorded in historical accounts. The unlikely part is that they never happen all at the same time to the same person.
Right.
So what Blady did in his research was, his research was highly dependent upon this book, Possession and Exorcism, by a gentleman named Traugott Osterreich, who was a German academic, and he collected a number of different accounts from Europe, France, Germany, different places, to kind of talk about what possession looked like in primitive cultures and then more modern cultures. And so Blady actually utilized that as a primary source when he began writing his book, The Exorcist. And so he utilized some of those different accounts, and he just combined them into one little girl, which is not very likely. to happen. So
makes for a
and
very
most of the
good
time,
story, though.
oh yeah, and very shocking movie, right? But
and if you
but
love
not
the
real.
movie, folks, you will love the book.
The book's frightening.
The book is
and the book,
terrifying.
if you read the book is really good, but listening to the book when you're driving at night is very, very scary.
Especially him reading it. His
the
voice
lady
was terrifying.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It was very, very scary.
Yeah.
So and this go back to the question you were asking earlier, Chad, about movies or books. I think some of the problem with them is that most movies or books elevate demonic power, right? Glorify demonic power, and it's more fear-based. And I think that's why I like two movies in particular the most when it comes to demonology. And I don't. It's funny. The more I get into this work, the more I do not watch scary movies.
Yeah.
Thank you. Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just
Chad's
don't
like,
have the
finally,
desire.
someone understands me. I'm ahead of the curve.
I'm not entertained. Like when I see those, I'm not entertained by it. Like I'm just like this, even though it's a fantastic thing, like this is a real thing. And so like I walk away like very heightened. Like I don't want to sound like super charismatic or weird or anything like that. But when I watch that, I just get super heightened. I'm just like aware of everything. And I don't like it. So anyways, go on.
Well, I do the same thing. I didn't used to. Brian and I, we'd watch movies together. We'd go and see The Conjuring or whatever.
Yep, that was the door. That's what it is.
In the recent years, I just don't watch them. I just don't watch them as much. But there are two that I've watched that I think are really, really good. That there's things obviously that I wouldn't necessarily agree with the movie. I'm not saying it's like completely accurate, but I like the way that they handle the possession. I like the way that they handle the warfare kind of approach, and even just the drama of what's actually taking place. The first one is called The Rite, and that movie is based on a book by Matt Baglio. He did some serious research several years ago into the actual training of Catholic exorcists in the Vatican, and this movie is based upon that book, and it stars Anthony Hopkins. He's one of the priests, and it's a very good movie. It has moments where it's frightening, but it's not fear-based.
Yeah.
It's honestly, one of the things I appreciate about it is it's helping to show the journey of this young Catholic priest who is really not a believer, to go into a place where he has faith and he trusts in God and the power of Jesus. And I think that's a really strong and compelling story. So that's one. The other one, like I said earlier, is The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And this one is good. It is a little bit odd because there's some Mariology that's involved in it. But with that being said, it's a really compelling story because it's based on a true story of a Bavarian young woman named Anneliese Michel. And she experienced demonic activity and they thought it was all kinds of things. She was seeing psychologists and psychiatrists, and she was on all kinds of drugs, and nothing would help her. Eventually, she ended up going to a Catholic priest, and they began doing exorcisms. And as a result of malnutrition, she eventually died because the demons would not allow her to eat. And it was it's a horrific, terrible story. But there's a portion of hope in it in the midst of all of it, because just in the backstory of Anneliese, and then with Emily, she's encountering these demonic figures, but through the power of God is winning, even in the midst of the loss. So that book there's a really great historical biography about Anneliese, written by Felicitas Goodman, that I would recommend. But those two movies, I think, are some of the better ones that don't just aim at the hype or the fear, but really try to tell a story. So.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Chad, no, I am drawn to those types of horror movies as well. The ones that are just demonic for demonic's sake, just for the fear factor. I'm actually not even interested in those, because I'm more interested in the story. And when the story is just focused on the fear and just focused on the jump scares, or so focused on on just highlighting the demonic, that's not a story to me, and really what, I believe, and I think all of us here would agree that the root of a good story is good versus evil. And that's honestly what draws me to demonic horror so much, because what is the worst kind of evil you can think of? Well, there it is. And then that highlights the best of good, which is God. And that's what I try to do with Memoirs. And that is, why I love these horror movies so much. And I would even add to that list, which I'm glad you said the right, Luke, because I love that movie. I think we actually saw that together.
I think so.
But I would add The Conjuring to that. It is a little more, Hollywood, and a little more.
The reason I didn't add it was because I'm very skeptical about the medium approach to.
Yeah, there's that too.
So, and I don't know. I may talk about that here in a few minutes, but like the idea of going and looking for assistance when it comes to demonic activity and attack from people that are not, based on scripture and through the power of God, it's very dangerous, can be very dangerous. Mm-hmm. And so approaching mediums, honestly, just oftentimes makes things worse.
Yeah.
If not all the time makes things worse, or seeing psychics or whatever it might be. So that's one of the reasons I didn't add that one, because I don't necessarily agree with the methodology that they use to kind of focus it on. So
yeah, that's an interesting topic. We might actually talk about that another time, have you on, because that's I've always been fascinated by that, because Ed and Lorraine Warren, which the Conjuring movies are based on them, Lorraine Warren was a Catholic, but was a medium. And then and how she approached being a clairvoyant was essentially God blessed her with this gift to be able to do that. And I've always been fascinated with that, because there's just some weird conflicting theology there from where I come from. So, we'll talk. We can talk about that another time. That'd be a really interesting topic to go in. So, we already talked about, how your work as a demonologist and an editor, of a comic about spiritual warfare overlap. What would you, just to sum up, what would you say in your own words is your role with Memoirs of an Angel, though, as a comic book editor? What do you do when you are reading a script that I send you and you're fixing all the grammar stuff? What else are you looking for?
I tell you to stop that.
He said, Brian, this sucks. Do it again.
This is terrible. Do it again. Awful. No, I think it's really, it's another eye on the world that you're building, an attention to detail when it comes to theological implications of how angels are operating, or how God is operating, or how the demons are approaching human beings. So I think a lot of it is just someone in your corner to be able to say, is this functionally right? Or, are you making this decision in the short term because of the immediate story that will have a wider impact on the grand scheme of the whole story? And I think sometimes for you, like as a creator, you get really involved in this small portion. You want to make it work, and it's a beautiful element and part. But then you need somebody there with you to say, well, if you do that here, is there going to be a residual effect later on in the story, or an echo that you wouldn't want? That you wouldn't want that to be the end result. So I think it's just being able to assist in some of those kinds of ways. And, I get to read everything before everybody else does. So I like that part too.
And I will say this, Chad, I don't know how many times, Luke, you can, chime in on this one. I don't know how many times I have had a specific question about like a weird thing that I want to do with the series. I just text Luke like, does this work? Like, what does this look like? And a lot of what's really cool, which is why I love our friendship so much, and I'm so thankful for it, is a lot of the things that end up in the book are just things we talk about normally, just because we're curious about the subject. But, I think when you're dealing with something that is so rooted in an already established worldview, in any kind of good world building, when you're building a story, you really want to focus on getting all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted. And there's wiggle room, right?
Sure.
In every
absolutely.
world building situation. But with this, because it has, so much to do with my faith and what we deem to be the most important thing, really want to get it right as much as one can. And folks, Luke does that for me, because if I was left to my own devices, it would suck. So thank you, Luke, for being a part of the team and doing such a great job. So, Chad, why don't you go ahead and take the next question?
Where were we? No, just kidding.
Chad's like, I checked out.
Chad's checked out. He's like, freaking out.
He's like, I'm looking for my sandwich. I don't know where is it.
Heightened senses. He's got stuff around him. I don't know.
Yeah, we triggered Chad. Oh no.
My mind, it's just a fog in my mind. I can't think straight. No.
Nobody Padre Felix Spirit Sante. There you go.
Yeah. Bless you. No, no, it's like super fascinating. I mean, I know where we are in the interview, but my mind is like all over the place of questions I have and things that we can talk about after this, but it's quite fascinating. So what would you say is the most interesting thing that you've experienced as a demonologist?
I think me personally would be probably waking up at 3 a.m. If I'm working on a particular case, and this has happened a number of times, wake up at 3 a.m. and have fear that is uncontrollable, where I have to, there's a solution. It's prayer, and praying that God would remove it and, remove these demonic entities from being attached to me or my home or whatever it might be. And God is incredibly faithful in those moments. And I know, Brian, you've experienced the same kinds of things.
Yeah, I was actually just about to jump in and say, in moments where I am working on if I'm writing or researching something heavy, really demonic, usually I'll find myself waking up at 3 a.m. with fear. It's so funny. Or if I've been, kind of working with you on a case that you're on, in some capacity, I find myself, going through that. And it's so funny because now I'm so used to it that it's almost like second nature to, like, if I wake up in the middle of the night, my first thought is, I bet it's 3. I'll just I'll look at the clock and be like, yep, there it is. And then I'll just I actually have, and through the years since this has, and Luke, I've shared some of these with you. I have just kind of a resource of prayers that are written down. I also have scriptures that I just immediately grab and go to. And really it has become like, when that happens, I go to that and I go back to sleep, and more often than not now that's it. So but I have the exact same experiences. I can.
That is weird. That's my first go-to, is to look, see what time it is.
Yeah.
If I wake up in the middle of the night. It's kind of like this, figure out what's going to happen next.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, all right, what do I need to prepare for? Okay.
It's only 1:30. We're good to go.
Yes.
Here,
I'm just kind of laughing to myself because I'm like, you guys woke up at 3. I'm still awake at 3. I didn't ever go to bed.
So see, that's how you shake the demons, Chad. You're just like, I'm awake already.
I'm still awake. Who cares?
You can't wake me up. I've always wondered what they do with daylight savings time. How do they know? I'm not sure.
They're just on top of it. I think as far as cases, though, as far as interesting experiences, I was just blessed to be able to serve a family maybe a year and a half ago. This woman, about 35-ish, she had been demonized since early childhood, since about 5-6 years old, and family had been very, very into the occult in various ways. She'd been into witchcraft as a young child, and so she was demonized, very severely, very much oppression, mental torment for years. But they would see physical entities in the home. She would see things on a regular basis, and to the point where the kids began hearing things, and they'd even seen, things move, which would be more like infestation. But it came to a head when she began getting directions from these spiritual entities to act, to kill herself or to kill her family or to, leave her family. And so she wanted to reach out for help. So, the Lord was extremely gracious. I was able to be with them for about 3.5, 4 hours, and we were able to expel 7 demonic entities from her life. And so, in those moments, I'm just very thankful for God's incredible power to overcome the evil one. So,
can I ask? And if you're not comfortable answering this, it's fine. How do you know there were 7? Like, how do you know we expelled 7 entities?
Oh, you go through a process one after another. So it's related to entry points and related to particular sin patterns. And that's part of the counseling stuff that I didn't go into earlier. And so you kind of chase one down and push it out through prayer and expulsion. And then you go back to the same kind of line of questioning, and you go through the same kind of.
So how do you know, and we can talk about this later, but how do you know that it's gone? Like, how do you know?
I do what usually I call them just kind of, what do I call it? Cleaning house or more or less, I go back through the same process. And it's interesting because I've done this with people that I didn't think had any kind of demonic attachment. In fact, her husband, and he was kind of fearful, and he didn't know, maybe he had, demons attached to him too. So he was a little bit worried about it. And so we went through that process, but he there was nothing there. There was no one speaking into his mind, and so there was no reason to continue on. And so once you get to the point where there's kind of a blankness or an emptiness, or it's their own thoughts, that it's noticeably their own thoughts, then you've kind of cleaned everything out.
Yeah, and you follow up too.
That's absolutely.
Part of
I think that's the most beautiful thing. And for 30 years, she, experienced weekly, if not daily, demonic torment and attack. And for the last 1.5 years, she's had nothing.
Awesome.
God has been incredibly gracious and faithful. So.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was like one of those things where the person experienced something, like all of a sudden they felt this weight off of them, or they felt like the lights
can
turned.
Happen. It can happen. That can happen, but not always.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, for someone that's interested in getting into your field of work, what would you say to them, and what path would or should they take in developing themselves?
I would ask them why. I think that would be the first question I would ask them. Why do they want to pursue this line of work? Because it's not for those who want to be God's gunslinger. You think about the story in the book of Acts, the sons of Sceva, and things didn't work out for those guys. They ended up naked in the street, getting beat up by a demonized person. In fact, I've found it to be the most difficult and humbling work I've ever done. And the glory doesn't belong to the people that do it. There's nothing in me that is powerful enough to stop demonic activity. It's only the power of God through Jesus that removes the demonic. And with that being said, I think that this work, it's been the most, spiritually rewarding that I've ever experienced, even as a pastor. Being able to assist people who thought that life in Christ and true peace was impossible to find, and then helping them find it. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's just incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, I feel like if you were to quote unquote sign up for this line of work, you would be a target. I feel like you would, all of a sudden you're bullseye number one, because you're helping people fight that, or releasing them from their torment and that kind of thing, which is definitely not what they want,
Yeah, there was a demonologist, an exorcist called Malachi Martin, and he was has a phenomenal story, and he talked about that very thing as an exorcist, being a target for the demonic, and constantly struggling with it. And in fact, there are some people that think that his death was actually caused by a demonic attack. So there is that is absolutely the case. And
the book that he wrote, just in case viewers are interested, is called Hostage of the Devil, by Malachi Martin, and very good.
Excellent. There's also a documentary, I believe it's still on Netflix, that kind of sums up. It's not the same as the book. The book is more in like cases that he was on, and the documentary is just more about him. On Netflix,
and like some are for him and some are against him, kind of.
Right.
Kind of
exactly. Yeah, and it's a really interesting documentary to watch.
There's another one about Gabriel. I can't know if I have the pronunciation of his last name. Amorth. He was the lead Vatican exorcist, Father Gabriel. And I think it's on Netflix too. There's a like a documentary about him. I've got 2 or 3 of his books. Just great stuff. I mean, I've watched that and I was just like, the way he does it, it's so like, even the tapping on the forehead that happens in the right, that he did that too. And like, I mean, he's just very calm. The person that he's dealing with is kind of freaking out a little bit. And he's like, I do this all day, every day. This is what I do. Like this is my full-time job. People just come in, exorcism. People come in, exorcism. He was like 85 or something like that.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So if someone were to be, essentially called into this, I think many people, like yourself, if you find yourself kind of stumbling backwards into this, what material that you haven't already mentioned, what would you point them to?
As far as for an exorcist or for a demonologist?
Yeah.
Or for someone who's dealing with demonization?
Or both, actually. Yeah, either one.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of resources when it comes to demonology, and I'm trying to think of what would be the best route for that. I did think through which ones I would recommend to someone who's being demonized. As far as just like background research, I think Heiser does a really good job with the Unseen Realm, and then Demons and Angels. All 3 of those books are very good. But then there's also some really helpful ones. There's a dictionary of deities and demons that's highly academic, but very good. It's like 1,000 pages, but I think you can find the PDF online.
I was going to say, you can go to like archive.org and find it. It's there. Yeah.
There's a really good author that I like. Never really got a good hearing in his time, but his name's Edward Langton, and he wrote several books on demonology in the Old Testament and intertestamental period, and then demonology and angelology in the New Testament. And so I enjoyed his books. I thought they were really, really helpful. I've got 20 pages of bibliography that maybe I can make available to you and send you some of those that you could maybe list in the notes for the
that'd be great. We can pass them on to Jeremy.
Yeah,
sure.
But that might be the most helpful way to do it, because there's just a lot of resources. There's another one by Ken Philpott called Demonology and the Occult that is really good. Kurt Cook, a German theologian, has some really great stuff. One's called Christian Counseling and Occultism that's really, really good. So anyway, there's a lot of resources for counseling and deliverance that I would recommend.
We'll list everything that you give us. We'll list it below so everyone can check that out. Now, you mentioned if someone is potentially being demonized, I want to ask, what should they do? And then I want to go to what should they not do?
Sure. Okay. Well, I what they should do is begin reading the Bible. Begin reading the Bible daily and praying and asking for God to deliver them. And I think it's important, especially for people that are believers in Jesus, to remember who they are. And if you learn one thing from the book of Ephesians, it's that Jesus, he has been raised up and his feet rest upon the demonic. He is empowered over them. And one of the most beautiful things in all of Scripture is Ephesians 2, where it says that we are raised up with him. And what that means is he has given us authority over the demonic. He has brought us up to that level of authority. And that's the reason you get to chapter 6, and he says, put on the full armor of God. And we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in heavenly places. What he's saying is the war is there and you have the authority to win it. So put on the armor correctly. And so I think knowing who you are, remembering who you are, and then memorize scripture. One of the things, Brian, you said just a moment ago is, prayers that you would pray in moments of temptation or in moments of attack, but also scriptures that you had memorized. There are scriptures that I think Psalm 91, for example, memorize Psalm 91 and let that be your prayer to the Lord, your declaration of his goodness and his faithfulness and his refuge to you. But be able to quote that in moments where you feel like you're being attacked. And then seek out assistance through your local church. We can't do these things on our own. Doesn't mean that you need an exorcist to necessarily come and do this for you. But we are Christians or believers in Jesus. Even all people were made for community, right? And so we come together in community, and that's where you find strength. That's where you find encouragement. That's where people can hear you and listen to you and offer good, solid counsel and advice. And so I would recommend those things. When it comes to books, if someone is struggling with demonization, there's 2 books in particular that I would recommend. There's a lot of books out there, and there's a lot of really bad books out there when it comes to this stuff. Both of these are older books, written probably in the 70s to 80s, but both very, very good and actually utilized quite often from those who write books now about spiritual warfare. I think of Carl Payne's book on spiritual warfare. Yeah. He leans heavily into Mark Bubeck's book, The Adversary. And so the first one I would recommend is The Adversary by Mark Bubeck. And he does a really great job of talking about the three kind of spheres of warfare, the flesh, our own, who we are, but then the world itself, the systems that are set up, and then the devil, that's the supernatural, and how we approach this kind of warfare. And there's some really great prayers that are kind of model prayers that you can utilize and change for yourself to make them work better for you. But this can keep you in track with what you want to pray. So that's one. And the second one is a book by Neil Anderson, and that one's called The Bondage Breaker. And that one's even more personal about like how to deal with who you are in Christ, and then how to approach the demonic in a way that you'll see victory, breaking down, things that are keeping you chained to sin and to patterns of sin, and seeking deliverance in that way. So I think both of those books are extremely good.
Great. And what would you say they should not do? Yeah,
I would unequivocally discourage them from seeking out psychics or mediums or witches or warlocks or doing astral projection or finding spirit guides. All of those kinds of things that are, whether they're new age or mystic or some sort of occultism, they're just very dangerous, and most certainly will make the situation worse. And so I would highly encourage people to go to a Christian, to go to a pastor, someone who's willing to turn to the scriptures for truth. And I believe that that's where you're going to find hope and peace.
Great. Well, thank you, Luke. Before we close out, Chad, you said you've had like 3,000 questions. You got anything to add really quick before we end it?
No, not right now. No.
Chad's like, I'm waiting for the after show.
I need to think through some things. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think, Luke, I just think you rocked Chad's world tonight. I think.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, I think you became a Christian again. I don't know.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being on, Luke. It was great. We'll have to have you back to talk about demonology part 2, maybe, or just world building in general. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And thank you all for tuning into the Dastardly Dingoes podcast. Remember to hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Also hit that bell to be notified when we have a new episode. And as always, kids, have fun, be safe, and go watch The Exorcist. See you next time.